The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's Mark von Schelwitz here, Vice President, Western Canada for Restaurants Canada. Thanks for taking part in today's webinar. I know it's been a really tough, stressful few weeks for you all, and certainly been hearing from many of you about all your concerns, and we're certainly trying to do our best to address them and to get some relief out the door to help you get through this COVID-19 crisis. Just really briefly, what we're going to cover in today's webinar, just a few slides on the economic impact and some of the survey results that we've received thus far. Then we'll go through a summary of the federal programs announced to date, the provincial measures announced to date, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion on reopening. And then I plan to hopefully have about 10 minutes or so to answer your questions. And apologies in advance, there's a bit of a time lag sometimes before I get them, but we'll try to get as many of your questions in as possible. So without further ado, we shall begin. If I can get the next slide, please. Sorry, a bit of a time delay there. Next slide, please. Sorry, Stephanie, next slide, please.
Sorry,
well,
Mark.
I guess just to, no problem. Okay, to begin with, we've done a lot of survey information, and we've also done our economic outlook survey. And I guess the point with this slide is that really the impact of COVID-19 started long before, the mid-March sort of social distancing measures that were introduced. In February already, 46% of our members say that their sales were down compared to the year before. In the first 2 weeks of March, that increased to 78%. And then, not surprising, once the public health orders went into place, the last 2 weeks of March and the first 2 weeks of April, almost all of you are suffering significant declines. So we're certainly aware. Next slide, please. And as far as the amount of overall sales decline from our really extensive Restaurants Canada survey, we understand that in the first half of March, we had about a 27% decline in sales. That increased 72% decline in sales the last half of March. So total March sales were already down by about 50%. Next slide, please. And of course, we know that in April and May, we're anticipating and have told the government of British Columbia that we're anticipating 80% decline in sales, which is a $3 billion in overall restaurant sales for British Columbia. As far as our survey information, our first one basically indicated that about 50% have temporarily closed all operations, and about another 40% are closed for your in-room dining, but are still offering some takeout and delivery. And in our second survey, that number increased slightly, which shows that those that were temporarily closed, some of them are reopened for the first time, trying takeout and delivery for the restaurants. As of the end of March, we had close to 10% of our members indicating that they're permanently closed. They've just handed in the keys. 5% haven't opened yet as they're seasonal businesses. And so that sort of gives you a snapshot of where we were in March. Our second survey also indicated the huge insurmountable debt levels that you're concerned about, indicating 1 out of 2 independent restaurants don't think that they'll survive 3 months, with half of those not even surviving for 2 months. And the biggest number one concern as far as growing debt levels was on rent, and then payments to your suppliers was the next one. So 76% on rent, 60% concerned about paying your different suppliers. So obviously we fed all that survey information into the government, and so they have a better understanding of just where we're at and the urgency of taking swift measures to keep us in business and keep the lights on until we get to a reopening phase. Next slide, please. So just to get into and many of you will be very familiar with these programs already, talking about some of the programs that the federal government has announced. The first one, of course, was the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, which is a taxable benefit providing $2,000 a month for up to 4 months for workers who lose their income as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And CERB is only available to laid off employees who do not have work. And CERB is not a program available to those who voluntarily leave their jobs, obviously, and it's administered by the Canada Revenue Agency to catch fraud and also to get money out quickly. Employees to qualify must have earned at least $5,000 in 2019, and employees are allowed to earn up to $1,000 a month while collecting CERB. This was something that wasn't initially in there, but we lobbied hard to make sure that we could still get part-timers being able to earn some money for delivery, etc., while still collecting CERB. The CERB funding goes back to March 15th, 2020, and provides a maximum of 16 weeks or 4 months of payments. And beneficiaries must let the Canada Revenue Agency know as soon as they are non-eligible. And they must have 14 consecutive days without work to be eligible. So that's a little summary of that particular program. Next slide, please. So the next slide, please. Sorry, delay on the slides here. There we go. Next program we'll talk a little bit about was the EDC Loan Guarantee for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. This program provides credit and cash flow loans through various financial institutions and credit unions to small and medium-sized businesses. Canadian businesses that must be financially viable and revenue generating prior to COVID-19 for eligibility. And it allows financial institutions to issue operating credit and cash flow loans of up to $6.25 million to existing clients, with an 80% of that money guaranteed by EDC. But this money has to be used for operational expenses only. Next slide. So this is the big one that I know many of you were anxiously anticipating. As we know, rent is by far the #1 concern that you've got as far as to remain viable through the COVID-19 crisis. And the federal and provincial government, which was announced, its intent is to lower rent by 75% for small businesses that have been affected by COVID-19. More details of this are expected in mid-May. This provides forgivable loans to qualifying commercial property owners to cover 50% of monthly rent payments for tenants who are experiencing financial hardship during April, May, and June. And eligible tenants who pay less than $50,000 per month in rent have temporarily closed or experienced a 70% drop in pre-COVID revenues. Landlord loans forgiven if mortgage property owner reduces rent by at least 5% under a rent forgiveness agreement, which includes a no eviction clause. And tenants then would be responsible for paying the other 25% of the rent. Again, we understand, just like with most federal programs, there's several gaps. There's several eligibility programs. They've got that hard number on the 70%. And it certainly didn't address our recommendations, which was for a plan that would prevent non-evictions, that would provide some sort of rent relief on a sliding scale based on your revenues, and also the length of time, only 3 months. We certainly wanted to see this apply for several more months, as we realize we're not going to be in full operating mode for quite some time. So lots of feedback, lots of questions on that, a lot of concerns, and we're very hopeful that the federal and provincial governments will take the gaps into consideration and make changes as they have with other programs that have been announced thus far. Next slide, please. So the next one, which I know you're all familiar with as well, is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. This applies to businesses with a revenue drop of 30% or more due to COVID-19, as far as being eligible for the 75% wage subsidy. 30% revenue drop to be compared to the same months in 2019 or average of January and February 2020. And you only need to show a 15% decline in sales for March, which I think most people would qualify for March on that. And the January-February 2020 average can be used for new businesses. The wage subsidies will be retroactive to March 15th and in place till October 3rd. The current maximum period of payment is 12 weeks. And on that, I just want to say that heard from many of you as well to extend that 12-week period beyond June. So for the June-September period, or simply extend it from 12 to 24 weeks to ensure that we have as many employers as possible that qualify for that and actually have staff working, which is not the case for many of you, for most of your staff right now. Next slide, please. So as far as British Columbia Provincial supports, they're very responsive out the gate. I was very pleased that we were able to get alcohol sales for takeout and delivery. Currently, it's to a temporary thing till July 15th. That was announced March 21st, and in that same first week when the emergency plans, I'm pleased that Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia all moved towards allowing alcohol sales and delivery. But I can tell you that we're already asking for that July 15th date to be extended, as we're clearly going to be in the situation for a lot longer than that. Also on March 23rd, the province provided the first steps in their COVID-19 action plan, which included $2.2 billion in business relief and included the following measures. Employer health tax deferral to September 30th, and that applies to all employers paying the tax. In other words, those of you with payrolls over 500,000. Also, provincial sales tax, all municipal and regional district tax, tobacco tax, motor fuel tax, and carbon taxes have also been deferred to September 30th. And the planned April 1st increase in the carbon tax and the additional PST registration on e-commerce and the implementation of PST on sweetened carbonated drinks has also been deferred to September 30th. And those were measures announced in the budget that they are deferring. Next slide, please. So the other thing that British Columbia announced that was welcome news, certainly on the rent piece, was that they were reducing their school tax by 50%. They announced that on March 23rd, and the finance minister then announced on April 16th that they'd be further reducing that school tax by an initial 25%. And that provides more than $500,000 in immediate relief. And commercial landlords are obviously going to pass on those savings to tenants in triple net leases. Now, the big piece, which the timing is yet to be determined on, and we certainly have a number of recommendations into the government, and that's on their longer term $1.5 billion recovery plan dedicated specifically for particularly hard hit parts of the economy, such as tourism, hospitality, and the culture centers. This is something that few other provinces have done, and we certainly appreciate that. And included in all those asks are asks for 100% wholesale liquor pricing for all liquor licensees, waiving of liquor and other sort of government fees. We're asking as well for WCB relief, something similar to what Alberta announced, where we can get a 50% reduction in premiums, a rebate on 2020 premiums already paid, and definitely a deferral that goes out for at least a year. So we're working with governments and all of our other business association colleagues, whether it be the BC Business Council, the Coalition of BC Businesses, the Tourism and Hospitality Task Force, our colleagues over at BCRFA, and various other hospitality associations, coming up with a comprehensive list of things that we want to be included in that. And it's nice to see that this money is going to be focused specifically on those that have been hit hardest. And of course, we're one of those industries that have been impacted first and are likely the last to fully recover from the COVID-19 social distancing measures and other public safety measures that are in place. So that's a brief overview of what BC's announced to date. We understand that more relief is coming. The only question is on the timing. After the initial relief that was announced, there's certainly been a big delay as government sort of tries to find their way through what they can do next, what sort of financial capacity they've got to do this. And we continue to work on all sorts of things. And I'm certainly very open to hearing any other ideas that you may have that we haven't talked about for example, municipal property tax relief, etc. Any ideas that you have on where you think the provincial government can help you get through this crisis, we're very interested in hearing from you on that. Next slide, please. So British Columbia reopening plan. As you're very well aware, sometime next week, BC is going to announce their reopening plan, and we expect similar sort of opening timelines for restaurants as other provinces announce, which is likely in early June. And as you're well aware, the Chief Provincial Health Officer requested that the restaurant industry provide feedback for reopening guidelines. She did this on April 20th. And as you know, BCRFA and ourselves have been working on a reopening plan best practices. We have a guide, and we're also sending a letter to the Premier with considerations that should be taken into consideration as we go into the reopening phase. And I also wanted to let you know that we've had input into the BCRFA reopening blueprint to ensure that our reopening plan and their blueprint are fairly consistent. I can tell you that the BCRFA plan is a little bit lengthier, a little bit more prescriptive than our guidelines, but bottom line, I think most of the operating procedures and the plans are quite similar in most respects. As far as where we're going, likely restaurant requirements require no more than 50% capacity. What we're advocating for, though, is that there be an option to provide an approved seating plan that's a little bit less prescriptive. So, for example, if you can exercise all the physical distancing rules, hygiene, and everything like that, but your seating plan comes out to 52% or 54%, we'd certainly like to see the government approve that as well, recognizing that the physical distancing measures, which are the objective, are still being met. We're likely to see 2 meters, although we're saying perhaps that's too much. It should be 1 meter separation between patrons or tables, or some sort of a physical barrier like plexiglass to protect the staff and the guests from the guests and the staff from being too close to the other patrons. Obviously, what's going to be really important in this is meticulous disinfection and screening of employees and patrons to ensure that there's no signs of COVID-19. So lots on the table there, lots as far as what we're going to need as far as PPE, cleaning, hand sanitizers. So it's not going to be life as usual. There's going to be additional sort of health and safety requirements as we are limited, as we get close to being allowed limited table service. Next slide, please. So today, actually, we're sending a letter to Premier Horgan asking for various things to be considered as they consider reopening restaurants in the coming weeks. And we've also are providing with them with our best practices reopening guidance document. This is a draft at this stage, sent to governments for their purposes. And we're looking to provide you with a complete handbook with restaurant protocols, practices to employ when food service operations are allowed to reopen. That's underway. I would say it's mostly concluded. And if anybody wants to see our initial best practices guide, please reach out to me and I'll send you what we have already. However, we're going to be waiting for the government of British Columbia to get back to us on their guidelines, and we will certainly be willing to edit and add on to our particular opening guide as we hear back from the province when we're getting to reopen. So those are the main points that I wanted to cover off today, and I wanted to make sure that we had about 10 minutes left for your questions. So please provide me with your questions, and I'll get them as soon as they're forwarded to me. So, for example, the biggest questions that I've had in BC is, can we get some of the deferrals converted into actual relief? And certainly we're working on that. The other thing that I should tell you as well is today or tomorrow, the province is likely going to announce employment standards changes to extend the temporary layoff period. What that exactly looks like, we're not sure yet, but I've heard rumors that they were only going to extend it for 3 weeks, which isn't enough. So we're looking forward to that, as well as the main thing is the reopening plan, which is going to be announced next week, and measures going to that. As far as timing of other announcements that the province is going to do as they go into the recovery mode, we're still waiting to see when that will come out. But the pitch to them that time is becoming critical here. And if we don't have some action pretty soon, we're going to have a growing number of restaurants closing their doors permanently. Other questions that you're talking about, I know there's been plenty on the whole rent assistance program, and we are certainly in touch with Minister Morneau's office, the Prime Minister's office, and the provinces on some of the gaps that are there. Any other questions that you can send in to me? And as I mentioned before, too, on the wage subsidy, we are working with the federal government as well on the rent subsidy as well to try and get some significant changes done to that program. Sorry, I've got a question here about where can they find. Oh, no word. Sorry, there's too many questions here. I'll deal with one at a time here. Any word on BC's minimum wage coming through on June 1st? The answer to that is no. Right now, we have a labor minister that I think is pretty reluctant to do that, although certainly through a number of different associations, we have made that request that at least the liquor server wage portion of that be waived or delayed for another year. However, this is a considerable election commitment that the government made, so it's a bit of an uphill climb on minimum wage, but certainly that is into consideration. Other questions is, can we get a copy of Restaurants Canada's reopening guide? I can certainly give you the draft that we have ready. Anybody who's interested, please send me an email and I can send you a copy of that. And eventually that we will have that document on our website as well. Is there any chance of rent relief being tied to the banking sector through regulations as banks are federal related businesses? Not that I'm aware of, but I'll certainly take that under consideration and use that for our input there as well. Other questions? Sorry, it's just taking me a while to get through here. Other questions with respect to, again, the liquor wholesale pricing piece. Yes, that we have had a lot of discussions with government, as you may know, through the BTAP panel that we formulated more than a year ago. We came up with a bunch of liquor recommendations, of which wholesale pricing was one. And there are, as part of the recovery plan, I know that the government is looking at that recommendation and somewhat optimistic that for the recovery phase that we will have some sort of wholesale pricing come in. Other questions? Our landlord does not have a mortgage on the property. Does that mean we won't qualify for the rent relief? I'm not sure about that, to be honest. I think the answer is no. I think you would still qualify, but I'm not sure about that. So I'll get back to whoever's answering that question. If you can send me an email, I'll double check that. A couple of questions as well on, again, the recovery plan. Again, I'll give you a copy of that when we're going through the whole thing. Definitely question about commercial property rent again. Should we push for participation to be mandatory? that's a big yes, because right now we're getting lots of calls from members saying that their landlords don't want to participate in the program, and there's nothing right now obligating them to do so, or to give you your notice period to pay in full. And that is something that, you know, we're seeing there's a big lack of teeth in that particular commercial rent assistance program. So another question here is, small gatherings of 50 people or less, does this mean we are not able to have 50 people in the restaurant at one time? We are certainly advocating that they don't put any restrictions on there. We understand that physical distancing has to be kept in place, but if you're a larger restaurant and you can easily accommodate more than 50 people while still respecting social distancing measures, that definitely we're hopefully not going to have that 50-person max in there. Also, with respect to table, the largest group, I understand the thinking is no more than 10, but I think realistically, we probably don't want to have tables of more than 6. Other question is, how do we know if staff receive CERB when they apply for CEWS on their behalf? I think you can probably find that out from the Canada Revenue Agency, but again, you certainly probably trust your staff on that, so that they're not double dipping, because if they are, they're certainly going to have to pay something back once it's tax time. All right, any other questions? Once again, I can take some of this offline. I've got a few other ones that are pretty technical here that I would appreciate if you would just send me an email on them and we can get back to you on those. Again, as well, I just wanted to thank you again for all of you providing input into this. We've had so many different ideas, and I think as well it's important to note that it's normally taking months or years to get done. Governments are trying to do in days and weeks. They've got certain legislative challenges and hurdles that they have to overcome to get this relief out the door to help us out. So, for example, even on commercial rent evictions, to prevent those evictions, many provinces have to get legislation approved, which is challenging in these times as well. But we keep working on it. As well, we have to keep into consideration that there is some sort of financial capacity that the provinces and the federal government have, and they can't just keep writing checks forever. So we have to be pretty focused and targeted with what we would like to see in relief. So, for example, rather than some of these bigger picture deferrals and reliefs, would it be better just to get some sort of a working capital program like Saskatchewan has implemented, so that they actually, no questions asked, you get a check, you can use it for whatever you want towards your operational costs. So certainly, you know, it's a challenging time, and we continue to work with the federal and provincial governments to get relief out the door. And again, though, look forward to all your suggestions and focused questions on types of relief that are going to be the most useful for you to get through the COVID-19 crisis. We're pretty much out of time for now, but again, I just want to thank you for participating today. Sorry if we didn't get to all your questions. They're coming in too quickly for me to read them all, and we're basically out of time today. But if you wouldn't mind, if your question wasn't addressed in today's webinar, please send me an email. My email address is on your screen, marketrestaurantscanada.org, and we can get into those questions a little bit more offline as well. Just want to thank you all for your time. Hang in there. I know it's tough times, but we're working as hard as we can to try and make sure that the industry gets through this. And best of luck as you keep trying to keep the doors open in the weeks ahead. And we look forward to reopening, hopefully some within the next month or so. And please be prepared as much as you can be for that eventuality when it happens. And look forward to Dr. Henry's announcement, the government's announcement next week on what reopening will look like. Once again, any feedback you have on our guide, which I will make available to you, happy to chat with you about that as well. So that's the end of our time today. Thank you again very much for participating, and take care, and good luck as you continue to struggle through this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.